Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Please come in and take your seats because we have a bit of a tight schedule and we want to move ahead with the next speakers and the panel that is awaiting you before we split up for lunch and for the study trips. So before the break, as you remember, we heard from the mayor of Lahti and we heard from Professor Magnus Ekagren. And what we really understood was that imagination capacity is crucial, that working together and being prepared for what awaits is crucial, and that listening to each other and exchanging views and knowledge and know-how and research is really crucial. So that is why we will now be turning to exactly the researchers. Actually, this is one of the researchers from Nordregio. It's Ágúst Bogason you will be meeting. He is a senior research advisor at Nordregio, and he'll be sharing his insights into the recent research on how rural regions are undergoing rapid green industrialization and have built socially rooted crisis resilience. He will also take a few of your questions. There will be a bit of a musical inspiration, I believe, in this presentation. Please welcome Ágúst Bogason.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just dive right into it, as we're already 5 minutes late, which isn't very... Well, it's quite Icelandic, but not very Nordic, I would say. It's okay for me to say that I'm from Iceland originally, so... Okay, so crisis as a concept is what we're discussing here. And we connect crisis quite often to negative experiences. Crisis disrupt normal life, can trigger fear, uncertainty and loss of control. And crisis can be organizational, societal, environmental, global, local, so on. They can even be personal. And we also tend to focus on the positive outcomes that come from crisis, and I think that's a good thing. We see them as a enabler for innovation and reform and so on. But at its core, it's of course often quite serious. Then resilience is a different concept that has gained popularity in the past years. And how it's defined and understood can vary, but the key points on resilience are that most people agree upon anyway, is the ability to absorb shocks, adapt to change, and recover while preserving core functions and identity. And I would speak more from a resilience and shock perspective than a crisis perspective. And shocks are rather related to events that impact and disrupt a system, while crises maybe are more acute and danger-driven in nature. But then again, a shock can become a crisis when the system fails to absorb and adapt quickly. And the adaptive capacity is therefore a key element when we speak about resilience. So in this sense, shocks can also be positive, and that's partly the point of departure for my presentation today. So the results I will speak about, or maybe around, come from an EU project that Nordregio participated in about territorial resilience and mainly the green industrialization in northern Sweden, which is one of the case studies there. The transformation surrounded by large investments like the ones connected to the green transition and the creation of new industries, these developments happened fast, and it's not only an economic or environmental, but also a stress test on the governance structure, on the social fabric. So it was not a creeping crisis as such, as we learned about earlier today, or any unforeseen change. It was very much a planned action that had a purpose. And the results at its core were supposed to be, and are, in the end, hopefully positive: more jobs, diversification, and a stronger economy, and so on. But it's nonetheless a shock for the communities involved, and the challenges surrounded by them are many. And we've learned about gaps in planning and coordination around this development. And we did this in this project by bringing together municipalities, industry representatives, chambers of commerce, employment services, universities, to explore resilience during the green transition in northern Sweden, both Västerbotten and Norrbotten. And we met them 3 times over a year, both as a group, and then interviewed them separately. And the purpose of this was to map risks and vulnerabilities linked to rapid industrial change, demographic pressure and infrastructure challenges, while also validating the concept of territorial resilience. So through this discussion, participants identified resilience factors and some practical measures to strengthen adaptive governance and prepare for future shocks. So therefore, the question that I will mainly be discussing here today is how do governance systems respond under pressure, and what makes a resilient region in times of stress. And after analyzing the results of all this and preparing to present here today, I figured out the answer. And the governance structures should be more like David Bowie. Bowie's career is one of adaptive capacity, the ability to shift form while maintaining an unmistakable identity. Therefore, I was very happy to hear the professor earlier also, even though he came from military university background, talking about creativity and the roles of the arts and so on. So I think we're in agreement, and I'm going to speak maybe more on the very local and regional level, and he was expanding the same thoughts, I would say, to international scene. So, more on Bowie. Starting out in the 1960s, Bowie did not really make an impact until he transformed into a character called Major Tom, and then later Ziggy Stardust developed into the Thin White Duke, always evolving. And unlike many artists who fade and then maybe fade away or fade and return, David Bowie never had to make a comeback because he was always ready to transform, constantly reinventing himself and staying relevant across music, film, fashion, and the art scene well into the 21st century. And even now, after he's gone, still influencing our cultural life. And my opinion is that these transformations and his adaptability became his strength, making him a cultural icon. Through different personas, but always at the core as Davy Jones or David Bowie. So, similarly, adaptive governance requires institutions that can sense emerging risks, respond creatively, and reorganize themselves without losing their core purpose, their core identity. And it's, of course, easy for me to stand here and tell policymakers and the people in this room about this. But I'm going to draw more on the findings from our ESPON TERRES project and other Nordregio research. So I can tell you a bit more about what the people working in the field thought about adaptive governance. So we explore resilience a little bit beyond the formal structures. So in stressful times, systems are very important, the formal systems, but we often go beyond them to secure that things happen fast and when needed. So some of the interviews and workshops we conducted showed us that traditional governance structures were seen as too rigid for the pace of the green industrialization. Interviews noted that everything had to happen simultaneously, which often became an obstacle. There were also competing claims between industries, tourism, and local, sometimes indigenous communities, and these could create tensions. The local governments also struggled to fund infrastructure for the green transition, and often without adequate support, they said, risking inequity and resistance. So they felt that the risk sharing and uneven power relations with the national level were in some ways problematic. And in a crisis context, local authorities often reacted quickly, but experienced bottlenecks at higher levels, sometimes dragging out decisions. So coordination gaps were therefore often mentioned. And regions also often expressed that they were in fact competing with each other, both for private and public investments. They were competing for the same labor, which could then intensify their structural weaknesses. And one stakeholder in northern Sweden also feared, and others agreed, that they were maybe becoming a resource colony, which benefit supplying other places while costs were staying behind in their region. So to address many of these tensions, we also discussed possible solutions with the stakeholders. And some mechanisms were suggested, for example, some sort of return systems where companies investing in local land also gave back to the communities both to build trust and acceptance. There was also quite often mentioned that stronger local governance and financial mechanisms were seen as key to fair distribution of benefits. Also that both of this that I've mentioned would have to be very transparent for legitimacy and general acceptance to increase at the local level. Addressing demographic challenges and land use conflicts through inclusive planning and targeted workforce policies is something that was frequently mentioned, involving relevant state institutions also, or ministries, preferably the same person or persons working at these places at the state level, to build trust in both directions. And then in general, we emphasize dialogue and network platforms between public and private sector, between governance levels, highlighting the need for the state level to have more trust in the local authorities during times of crisis and in general. And very related to this, we discussed, or they mentioned, flexible governance. They called for extraordinary approaches during extraordinary times, shortening regulation timelines and allowing experimental trials locally, simply to be able to react fast. But as one interviewer put it so clearly, our current structure is not made for crisis. Everything has to happen at once, and that's an obstacle. Our governance systems are built for stability, not speed. The answers can therefore be interpreted, and I do that the local stakeholders want to behave more like Bovi, but they're unable to. The job ahead is therefore to find ways to make it possible to become Bovi. And I think that reflects on what we heard earlier, that we need to institutionalize some creativity, innovation, and the ability to try new things out. And find ways then to build into our formal structures a way of thinking that being creative, allowing ourselves to adapt, doing bold innovations and some radical changes is necessary for a resilient governance. And in the Nordics, especially in the rural Nordics, we have many advantages. The municipalities, civil society, industry are all closely connected. And in an international comparison, the Nordics already have municipalities and regions with great autonomy. Informal networks are closely tied, and the networks often compensate for formal, rigid governance structures. And in the Nordics, we also have already high levels of social trust. And one of the Nordic advantages is sometimes referred to as the Nordic gold, this high social trust. That is the shared belief that people and institutions can be relied upon to act honestly, fairly, and for the common good. That being said, we trust our institutions, we trust our neighbors, we trust our police, and we trust our government. We may not agree on everything, but we still trust them. And social trust is what allows informal networks to function effectively, enabling rapid, quick adaptation and maybe pragmatic problem solution when formal systems are under strain. And now you might ask why this matters. Well, it's because resilience is not just about rules and plans, it's about this. It's about relationships. Informal, social, infrastructure, and collaborative capacity are critical, especially under stress and in crisis. The social trust that we have so much of, when it's high, actors can share information and resources quite quickly without excessive checks or bureaucracies, and this is crucial during fast-moving transitions or crises. The trust minimizes the need for rigid control mechanisms, lengthy negotiations, and legal safeguards. Decisions can be made fast because people believe that all others will act in good faith. So adaptive capacity often depends on informal ties that fill in gaps when formal structures are slow, and social trust make these networks effective, allowing pragmatic problem solving and innovation. Also, communities are more likely to accept difficult decisions, such as land use changes or industrial projects, when they trust institutions and believe benefits will be shared fairly. So trust encourages openness to experimentation, openness and shared learning, and they're essential for governance systems to evolve rather than resist change. Or in short, social trust is the kind of invisible infrastructure that makes resilience possible. It can turn governance from a slow-moving process into an adaptive collaboration much faster. But we also have some bottlenecks. Large-scale shocks, crisis disruptions often involve national and even international responses. And what we often encountered speaking to stakeholders with experiences in this was that dealing with the national level, people often had to start at the beginning at every time of contact, constantly explaining to a new person what the matter was about instead of having maybe a trustworthy contact or two within the relevant ministry or institution that they could go directly to. So to try and wrap it up quickly, if I get back to one of the interviewees we spoke about, who said everything has to happen at once, and that's an obstacle. Our governance system wasn't made for stability, speed. And of course, they were designed that way for a good reason also. But our experiences now show that informal social infrastructure and collaborative capacity are critical in crisis. When people at the local or regional level had in fact formed a relationship with someone at the national level, they had established trust. People noted much faster and efficient outcomes. And these lessons should inform future governance designs for shocks, crises, and transitions. Then how to scale up the adaptive governance models, or the BOVI model, or what we will call it now. It often emerges out of necessity and is made possible by proximity and built on trust. It's able to be very flexible in times of needs, but to scale it up to the national or even transnational level, I don't really have the answers for how we need to do it, but I can tell you that it is needed to be incorporated somehow. And I believe there's a panel right after me, and I can promise you they probably have all the answers needed. But getting back to the main question, how do governance systems respond under pressure and what makes regions resilient in times of stress? If we split it into two, we can say shortly that governance systems often reveal gaps in planning and coordination under stress. But they adapt through informal, networks and pragmatic problem solving when formal structures are rigid. And for the second part of the question, what makes regions resilient in times of stress? Regions are resilient when high social trust, short institutional distances, and collaborative capacity enable adaptation beyond the formal networks. High social trust acts as the foundation for cooperation. Collaborative capacity allows actors to pool resources and knowledge effectively, and informal networks complement formal networks, filling gaps when the formal systems tend to slow things down. So they create an ability to adapt pragmatically rather than waiting for the top-down directives. And it ensures continuity under pressure. So final wrap-up. This, I think, is the core message. Resilient systems don't try to avoid shocks. They learn from them and they're able to adapt. The people we spoke to wanted to be like Mr. David Bowie, and we need them we needed the structure to be that it is made possible for them to behave that way. So under pressure, governance has to change, stay flexible, but at the same time, stay very true to its core purpose. David Bowie stayed relevant because he reinvented himself without losing who he was. And our governance systems need to do the same and have the same approach. Use local trust and close connections to act fast and find ways to incorporate that better into our national structures. That's at least one way we can build some sort of local resilience that's able to last.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ágúst. Just two quick questions because we're already ruining the schedule. But there's a question that's come from the audience for you. I know you say that how is not really your speciality. We'll leave some of it to the panel also. But the question is, how can clear responsibility be maintained when governance relies more strongly on informal networks and creative responses and trust? Do you have a reply to that?
Short answer, no, I don't have a reply to that. No, I mean, and I mentioned also we have, of course, our governance structures as they are because of responsibility and accountability and so on. And that's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting that we get rid of that and people are allowed to do what they want. But very often, and I think it's also maybe a part of our Nordic identity, and it's maybe a little bit different, of course, I'm generalizing very much, but different between countries. But we have it very strong in our DNA that we have to get approval from a person above. And I think it's more than maybe then a cultural shift within the organizations also to maybe delegate some of the power that the people that are first contacted are able to make some sort of decisions by themselves to act yeah. Instead of having go up the stairs and I don't know, all the way up to the minister and then trickle down on all the offices to the person who then provides the answer, because that takes time. Misunderstandings can be on the way. So it's more of changing the internal culture, I think.
Into empowerment of the individual, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, for very large decisions, this doesn't work. But there are small examples that we can mention that show that people should just have taken a decision, allow this, and then deal with the formality later because it's an acute situation.
And and action is needed. Ágúst, that is what we had time for. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Thank you.